Hello everyone, my name's Gavin and welcome back to the Chronicles of Final Fantasy XIV. Today we're going to be taking a look at a couple of the oversights and the exploits that Yoshi P's team unknowingly implemented when they took over the project. While most of which weren't very major or game-breaking, a couple of them actually did affect the relaunch of Final Fantasy XIV, so we'll get into that right now. The first of these exploits that I'm going to mention isn't really a major exploit, but it was something that I was surprised to see when initially getting this content. So prior to Yoshi P's team taking over Final Fantasy XIV, there weren't a whole lot of fights or battles or any kind of battle content outside of Leave quests for us to take on. So the team ended up implementing the primal fights that we all know and love. But when these primal fights were implemented and introduced to the game, players were still dealing with a heavy amount of latency, so attacks that you thought you avoided, you were actually still kind of stood in on the server side, so you'd get hit by that damage. The latency, I believe, was almost 3 seconds or so to the server, and a lot of people were still having connectivity issues at the time, so it was really hard to complete these fights. But a lot of players actually studied the fight and they made diagrams, and they ended up finding out that there were certain points on the battlefield where every party member could stack and you wouldn't take any damage from any of the plumes. And in turn, this allowed a lot of players to get their first initial win and be able to farm this fight as well. And in doing so, it allowed them to gear up a little bit more, or at least get their weapon for the next primal fight, which also had an exploit. And that next primal fight would be Garuda Hard Mode. In Garuda Hard Mode, the exploit was a little bit different this time around. In this exploit, pretty much what would happen would be you would get one warrior and you would get your one healer, and the remainder of your party would just go as Black Mage. Everybody that was on Black Mage would just continue to burn Garuda while your warrior pretty much self-healed, and whenever they took too much damage, then the healer would help them top up. So in doing this, a lot of people were also able to farm their Garuda weapon, and once you had that Garuda weapon, you were a little bit more prepared for what we would consider the final boss battle of 1.0, which would be Riven Road Hard Mode. And while Riven Road Hard Mode didn't have an exploit that I'm aware of, I do know that it was an extremely hard content, and upon completing this content, you were rewarded with the White Raven earrings, which were extremely exclusive for 1.0 players, until 2018's The Rising event, in which the earrings were available for every player to obtain. And now moving on to the exploits that were a little more noticeable when 2.0 launched. In 1.0, what ended up happening was when Warrior was introduced, it had a lot of regenerative abilities for its own HP, and this in turn would cause it to be the go-to job to power level every other party member. And how this worked was that the Warrior would join the party, they would run out and aggro every single mob that they could in the vicinity, run back to the party, each and every single one of the party members would hit the mobs, and then the warrior would drop the party and just AoE down with Steel Cyclone until everything died, and then all the experience was given to everybody that was a lower level party member. And this was able to be completed in a lot of different areas. Personally, I can remember people doing this in Nafik as well, and Natalan with the Exalt. And when this became a little bit more widespread knowledge, a lot of people took advantage of it and quickly leveled every single one of their classes to level 50. And this, however, was eventually patched out by nerfing the abilities of Warrior and making their health regeneration a lot lower. But if you were around at the beginning of A Realm Reborn and you wondered how so many people got to level 50 so quickly on all of their jobs, this is the explanation for that. Now, this next exploit that I'm going to go over is quite possibly the most game-breaking exploit that was introduced in 1.0, and this was actually just a minor oversight by the team. This was a Gil exploit which allowed a lot of players to max out their Gil, and in turn allowed them to carry over the max amount allowable for when 2.0 was launched. Now, the timing of this exploit was actually really important to the whole situation, because this exploit only occurred around the time that everybody knew that the servers were going to be taken offline and that a new version of the game was going to be released, and that a portion of our guild was able to be transferred over to the new release of the game. Now, what Yoshi P and them did to alleviate a lot of this influx of guild going into the new game is that they reduced the amount of guild that we were allowed to carry over to the new version by one whole digit. And in announcing how much gil we were allowed to carry over, a lot more people had incentive to go and max their gil now, so that way they started the new game wealthy enough to not have to worry about any purchase that they may need to make. So there's a little bit of background information that goes hand in hand with this exploit that you need to know in order to understand why it was possible for this to happen. And the first of which being that the players knew that Dalamud was going to be falling on Eorzea, as the meteor was in the sky at the time and you could see it closing in. So what ended up happening is that Adamus gates started spawning outside of various aetheryte points in the field, and these Adamus gates would end up spawning monsters for a large amount of people to kill. So a larger group of players would go in and kill these ads, and then they would also kill the gate, and if you did enough damage, you were presented with over-aspected crystals that you could trade into your Grand Company. Now, upon trading in over-aspected crystals to your Grand Company, you could choose a number of rewards to actually get from that, and one of these rewards was called Dawn Drops. These Dawn Drops could then be sold off to an NPC for a high amount of gil, and this in turn allow you to cap your gil very quickly. And I remember a lot of players taking advantage of this exploit very, very early on, as this knowledge was very widespread and it was rapid fire. A lot of people wanted to take advantage of this to cap out their gil before this was eventually patched out of the game. And it was eventually patched out of the game. They reduced how much gil that the Dawn Drops were able to be sold for, so that minimized the amount of gil that players were able to obtain. But it was a little too late at that point, and a lot of players, like I said, just started 2.0 with the maximum amount of gil possible, and had no need for gil for a very long time. A lot of these oversights and exploits are things that actually often occur in MMO games, as they're being updated on a frequent basis, so you can't really rag on Yoshi P and the team for not having enough time being torn between making a whole brand new game and actually making sure that the old game was playable enough for the players and exciting enough for the players to keep them sticking around for a bit. And other occurrences of these have happened since 2.0's release, most of which just being minimal in terms of just people ignoring boss strategies or ignoring dungeon mechanics, but since then a lot of these oversights have been quickly addressed, and the team has been doing a top-notch job ensuring that the content isn't as exploitable as the gil exploit or anything of that level. And these are just a few things that I've encountered from playing 1.0, so it's very possible that I may have overlooked a few things, or maybe I didn't dive into a couple of other things that happened throughout the life of 1.0. So if you guys have any information on that, or if you just want to talk about your own experiences in the comments below, I'll be sure to read and try to get back to each and every single one of you. I appreciate you guys watching my video, and if you like my content, stay tuned, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and I'll see you for the next one. Take care.